Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TI Talks Live here at Ißbrücker. So throughout this week at 3 o'clock every day, we are hosting discussions and panels that are exploring some of the fundamental questions around packaging and sustainability here at the Taghleef stand. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of moderating the first panel, and I should introduce myself. My name is Tim Sykes. I'm brand director at Packaging Europe. I have the pleasure of introducing another panel today. So before we start, I'd like to just invite you all to hang around afterwards. There will be a networking session after the panel finishes today, and it's also an opportunity to check out the rest of the Taghleef stand. In the far corner, there's the dynamic cyclers section where you have a chance to get very sweaty cycling on one of those exercise bikes over there. There is a good cause involved. I'm told that Taghleef will be donating to victims of the Turkish earthquakes for every kilometre that is cycled. Yesterday, I actually got to the top of the leaderboard, but I see that someone else has now reached 5 kilometres, which I'm definitely not going to exceed, but you can have a go at that. Also, behind you, the redesign area is a showcase of many of the collaborations and innovations around sustainable packaging design that Taghleef's been working on. So do please stay with us after the panel today. Anyway, also just to stress, we will have a period for questions and answers at the end of the panel, so please don't be shy. If you have any questions that you'd like to put to the audience, to the speakers, do raise your hand at the end. So today's discussion is focusing on the topic of bioplastics, and more specifically, we're talking about biodegradable, compostable plastic films, thinking about the environmental potential and maybe the limitations of these, the business opportunities and the barriers around them as well. And I'm very pleased to have 4 speakers with different perspectives on this topic. First of all, we have Rick Passenier, who is a bio-based and circular economy entrepreneur with a background in industrial product design. I think 4 years ago, he co-founded the non-profit global organization for PHA, which is called Go PHA, to try to promote and proliferate the use of PHA bioplastic. Secondly, we have Constance Ißbrücker, who, after some years in scientific research, moved into the European Bioplastics Organization in 2013, and she now occupies the role of Deputy Managing Director and Head of Environmental Affairs at European Bioplastics. Third, we have Leah Ford, who is Senior Global Marketing and Comms Manager for NatureWorks, and has been in that role for 18 years, I think?
I've been at NatureWorks for 18 years,
Okay,
yes.
18 years, sorry, yeah. And has specialities including ESG and sustainability reporting. And last but not least, Derek Atkinson, a chemist by profession, and he's been responsible for TotalEnergies Corbion Lumini PLA business development for over a decade, and currently has the role of Senior Business Director for the Americas at Total Corbion PLA. Welcome, everyone. Constance, I'd like to start by... I'd like to start, I think it would be useful to maybe contextualize the discussion that we're having today. Bioplastics is a very, very wide topic, and we're not going to try and cover everything related to bioplastics today, but specifically want to talk about compostables. Maybe you could briefly define what we mean when we talk about compostable plastics and where they sit within that broader bioplastics family.
Yeah, maybe generally bioplastics is a term that comprises a whole family of materials. And to be a bit more specific, on the one hand, it refers to the feedstock. So they are produced or made from renewable feedstock, crops, plants, like starch or corn, for example. On the other hand, it refers to the end of life. So some of these plastics are biodegradable. It's very important to specify where they are biodegradable. So not just say it's biodegradable, but refer to a certain environment. And here we come to compostable, because compostable means it's biodegradable in composting environment, industrial composting or home composting.
Thank you. So, first of all, in this discussion, I'd like to focus on the why questions around compostable plastics. And then we'll go on to think about the applications and the challenges and opportunities. But first, I'd like to think about the environmental impact that we have as an alternative to conventional plastics. So, especially where we have applications maybe where recycling is the key, where recycling isn't a possibility. Perhaps we could start with Derek. What do you see as the key environmental impact and advantage?
I think one of the key areas of compostable packaging is what it can facilitate. So you can do any number of analyses or carbon footprint analyses on the packaging, but that is not really the important criterion. The important criterion is the diversion of food waste away from landfill into a composting environment. Food in the landfill is very, very bad for the environment. The amount of methane, everything else that's produced is the worst thing you can do. So when you look at the use of compostables, that is the prime driver, taking food waste away from landfill into a composting system. Conventional polymers that are contaminated with food are not able to be recycled. So inevitably they go into the landfill and the food there is not where it should be.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add something to Derek, especially if we're talking about films for packaging. Films tend to be very fugitive products, right? There are a lot of films for sachets or for wrappers. You know, people throw them away in bins, but even out of bins, they blow away with the wind. Especially there, you need biodegradable or compostable properties.
Thank you. Leah.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, food waste in landfills is the third largest source of methane emissions globally. And the US EPA at the beginning of last year published a study that showed if you divert 25% more food waste to compost, you can reduce the associated carbon footprint by 30%. And that kind of ratio for food waste diversion is very difficult to ignore. And once you have that food waste in compost, you're not only creating a really beneficial soil amendment, but it can actually help soils sequester more carbon inside it, building upon the carbon benefits of sending compostable packaging and food waste to compost. So it's really quite additive.
Thank you. And of course.
If I may add on that, when we are talking about environmental impacts, how is it often assessed? Usually it is used a life cycle assessment, right? And this is also our position as European Bioplastics, that currently life cycle assessment as it is cannot properly assess the advantages of compostable plastics. There are, for example, indirect effects. So as my colleague said, if you divert the bio-waste from the landfill, you reduce also GHG emissions by reducing methane that could be emitted. But this, for example, is not yet really assessed in life cycle assessment. So there are still also in this case a need for developments.
Thank you. And we talked about food applications being central. Maybe we could expand a little bit about where the key opportunities to deliver those environmental benefits. What are the key packaging applications that we're seeing at the moment in use?
Yeah, maybe I can start with some of the products that are definitely not recycled, right? So, of course, in the hierarchy of waste management, we always try to go for mechanical recycling first, right? But there's already today, even if you make small products, pouches that are, let's say, below the size of A5, A4 size, they're not being mechanically recycled anyway. Yeah, so I would say also there's developments there, but there's definitely an opportunity for creating compostable loops. There's a lot of contaminated streams, right? Anything that comes in touch with wet food, very diverse food like coffee, tea, but also takeout containers are all great opportunities there. But let's also not forget cosmetics packaging. Yeah? Cosmetics are also contaminated with fatty acids, oil substances, very difficult to recycle. So all those applications would be key targets to start working on with compostables.
Yeah, I would go along with that. I think there's some other areas. Some of the application areas are really quite technically difficult. So if you take a potato chip packet has been engineered for the last 20 years. They've done everything they can to down gauge it. The performance that has to be achieved is really very high. No one wants to open every 20 packs of crisps. Every 20th one they open, the crisps are soggy. So you want every single crisp in every single packet you ever eat to be absolutely perfect. And that requires amazing amounts of technology to allow that to happen. And these films are very, very complex multi-layer structures. What is the end of life for that? There can be no end of life. They're complex structures. We don't want to go down, okay, you could say you can make a chip bag that had the right barrier properties out of, I don't know, OPP that was 10 millimeters thick. But who wants to have a bag that's 10 millimeters thick? We need to be not getting ourselves involved in solutions for, say, recyclability that are counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve. We want to use less. We don't want to use more. Monomaterials can send us into the regime where we're using much more when there are alternatives. So if you said, okay, we have a compostable material, whether involving PHA, PLA, or other combinations of materials that are home compostable and able to offer all the barrier requirements that are necessary, then the end of life can be a composting end of life. It can be not a recycled end of life because it's a very complex structure, but if it was to have the situation where it got into the environment, it won't be persistent in the environment.
And we're still very early in what multi-layer films can accomplish using bio-based materials. I mean, these have been commercially available for a fraction of the time that petrochemical plastics have been available. And so when you start looking at the inherent properties to bio-based materials, we're just getting started figuring out what they can do and what they can do at scale. And even more so when you combine bio-based materials, like maybe PLA and PHA, what those can also accomplish. I think there's still a lot of innovation to come so that we'll be able to tackle some really difficult things from, small sachets to very large bags and provide a lot of the properties and barrier properties that Derek was talking about.
Yeah. I would just add that as the organizer of the Sustainability Awards competition, we've seen quite a lot of innovation over the last few years around bio-based coatings as well to add barrier functionality to bio-based films.
I had one more thing to add because actually Constance and I were just talking before also about the agricultural segment. Actually, there's also a lot of contamination of films, a lot of use of films as well, especially mulch films, for example, but there's also other applications. Quite difficult to reprocess them, wash them, etc. And they're already basically contaminated with organic material, right? Therefore, it makes a lot of sense to pursue the composting route.
Great. So we're talking about the environmental impacts, maybe on a more theoretical level at the moment. I'd like to ask about the real-life consequences at the moment of using compostable films. And maybe Constance, with that overview of the entire European bioplastics world, you could comment a little bit on that.
Yeah, let's put it like this. There are a lot of discussions on compostable plastics and also about their processing in industrial composting plants in Europe. However, it has been shown it works well in Italy. It's very well established in Italy. You have difficult countries like Germany. Everything goes very much back on the harmonized EN 13432, so the standard for organic recovery of packaging. And there you have a discussion about the disintegration time. And the standard says it's 12 weeks. And we know that a lot of plants in Europe, they are fine with that time. But then you have, as I said, the example Germany, where they say, we compost just 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so very short. And then you have, of course, a certain reluctance from the composters even to try it, I have to say. Because our experience was if composting plants try, they see it works, yeah. But to get over this hurdle, this is very difficult at the moment.
Good. So we've talked about the why questions. I'd like to now move on to some more how questions and the practicalities of increasing the usage of compostable films. I guess there are various barriers and challenges to meet. I'd first of all like to ask you about the regulatory landscape and how you see that as conducive. Maybe that we're going to Constance again on this question. Obviously, we've had the PPWR beginning to emerge. How does it look at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, PPWR, this is the big topic for our industry. I mean, what is very much welcomed, of course, from our association is that certain applications are supposed to be mandatory compostable. The fruit stickers, tea bags, and especially coffee capsules, because it totally makes sense to have coffee capsules compostable, because you have like 80% of organic material after using it. Why put it somewhere else? It totally makes sense to put it into the compost, right? On the other hand, the situation for other kind of packaging, it's difficult. But on the other hand, I mean, we have mentioned that there are so many useful also other packaging applications where it makes sense to have them compostable. Everything that comes into touch with easily perishable food, for example, which also has a high chance of being misthrown into the bio-waste anyway. So it would be great if there would also be more support for this kind of packaging, of course.
I wanted to add something on the PPWR because there's also some complexity because regulators in general would like to standardize everything for all, right? And this is very complicated because actually what we're talking about is different waste management situations basically in any municipality, in this case in Europe, right? So that also means there's different infrastructure. So there needs to be also communication, test beds for different kind of applications in place. Something else which is quite dangerous in the PPWR is that they really stimulate the use of recycled content, which is by any means very positive. But if you're making compostable products, that also means that normally, or in a lot of cases, you're using renewable content. And this renewable content also needs to be considered at the same level as using recycled content. And that's something that's still missing today.
Would either of you like to add something?
Yeah, legislation can be very helpful. So if the PP plastic packaging waste regulation comes in and they ban coffee capsules that aren't compostable, I'll certainly be rejoicing in the street. But I think there's a problem when you simply regulate 3 items. So it's great for those 3 items, but the items that don't make the list, you said, okay, there's no real push for compostability. So if anything, there's a push against compostability. And so you have the focus on those particular things. And there's many other areas that would significantly benefit from compostable solutions. And people are saying, okay, well, it's not in the regulation. It's in the regulation, some way you read it, it actually says composting is bad for these things. And then that makes it, okay, very difficult to argue to someone that, look, you should be doing this because this is the best solution. You're making a yogurt cup. Half the yogurt cups get thrown away contaminated with yogurt. Composting's great. Yeah, let's make it out of PLA or whatever it is, and let's have it composting because that's objectively a good thing to do. And that regulations that are well-intentioned can sometimes have consequences that don't quite live up to expectation.
It's interesting because, dealing with plastics and plastics waste is, if you look at it on its own and just at the packaging or just at the plastic, you're kind of missing the forest through the trees, right? Because none of these things exist in isolation. They're not the final product. Consumers are buying food, and it just happens to come with packaging. And if you think you're just going to treat just the packaging in any one instance, it's only part of our waste problems globally. And I think that happens a lot with plastics, is people are so laser focused on what do we do with the packaging that we miss the greater opportunities. I mean, no packaging stands alone.
Yeah, sorry, one more thing, because, of course, PPWR is very prominent today, but at the same time, there's also regulatory opportunities, right? So we have the Waste Framework Directive, which is becoming also effective in a different way from 1st of January. They are basically promoting the model which is already established in Italy and are going to promote it in other member states of the European Union. The only concern there is that, you can, of course, advocate for something, you can stimulate things, but you still need to build infrastructure, right? The same investments are needed for compostability infrastructure as for mechanical recycling infrastructure.
I think also it's important to think about the EU in terms of silos. So you have different aspects of the EU doing different things. So you have the bio-based economy is completely ignored by what we're doing in terms of promotion of bio-based materials in compostable and recyclable packaging. It's ignored in that respect, but we have huge amounts of work going on. We want to have a bio-based economy. There seems to be a lack of conversation between each other and saying, okay, if you do that, it has consequences over here. They're quite happy to work in their little silos and generate their own amounts of work and FP7, FP8 programs without actually getting to the final area of where we want to be. This is the goal, and bio-based materials has to be part of that.
Yeah, please.
Maybe something on where there's a chance that maybe the acceptance will be improved for compostable plastics. I earlier mentioned already the EN 13432, and the standard is currently revised. And there are discussions about adding a real field on-site test to the standard as mandatory. This is actually already done in Italy, right? To improve acceptance, it's already done in Ireland. And I think if that would be really part of standard and certification, that would really help to increase acceptance.
Just to comment on Derek's point. We did some analysis work on how much indeed was spent on subsidizing Horizon FP7 projects on PHA. It's more than 100 million over the last few years, right? But then there's still some limiting regulatory barriers put in place, which indeed don't make sense. They don't correspond with each other.
I think that's a recurring theme with European regulation, that well-meaning pieces of law don't necessarily join up very well, do they? So moving on to another area of a factor of limitation or possibility, I'd like to ask you about the market's attitudes to compostables. I think thinking about the brand owners and also end consumers. I recall attending a European Bioplastics conference maybe 4 years ago, and there was a speaker from the German cafe band, and he was talking about research that they had done where consumers had basically said, we want to have biodegradable packaging, but he was also noting that there was a difference between what they think they want and their preference for shiny aluminium Nespresso pods. So I'd be interested in hearing all of your views on what does the market think at the moment, and does it require more education? Constance.
I mean, what is advantages for compostable materials, also renewable materials in general, is that there is a demand from consumers to have more sustainable packaging, also to look into compostability, yes, to have these kind of opportunities. And they're also willing to pay more. This has been shown. They're willing to pay more if the packaging proves to be more sustainable. And on the other hand, I think the biggest issue still is policy. Factually, there is no policy support for compostable materials and renewable materials. And if this is improved, of course, then the sky is the limit, right? But we are not there yet. We are just not there yet. On the other hand, also a problem still is communication. I mean, you asked me in the beginning to clarify all the terms again and again. I mean, I could do this on a daily basis and still I would not reach everybody, right? So, yeah, I think, but this is the task also of us association together with industry, with our members, to make clear rules for communication and be transparent what the materials can do.
And I think consumers, I mean, they want to do the right thing. Inherently, they want to make better choices. But I think as an industry, we need to not shift the burden onto consumers to always have to make an incredibly educated choice when it comes to how to dispose of their packaging. The average consumer does not flip over, a piece of packaging and look for the material identification code and can tell you what HDPE means or PLA means, etc. So how do we make it instinctive and easy? And so as Constance was describing with a coffee capsule, a consumer looks at that, they look at a tea bag and they're like, this is food, like this should go in my bio bin. And you see rates of contamination in compost from things that contain a lot of food waste. And so when you can deliver packaging that makes it instinctive and easy for consumers, they're going to feel even better that not only is this an easy choice for them, but that they are making the right one. And it's really important that industry understands, like, we can engineer better systems on behalf of consumers, because to be educated on materials and end of life, I mean, it's why we spend all this time talking about terms, is because it is a complex and nuanced subject. So how do we label things as not compostable versus compostable? How do we make things instinctive? I think that's incredibly important, because education is only going to get you so far. Until every kindergarten is teaching kids about compostable packaging, we're going to have a gap, right?
So harmonization and simplification of the labeling methodology would be very welcome from your point of view.
I think we also suffer from mixed messages. So if we take the global industry of polymers, we have very different messages. If people who were at the K show last year, so everyone and his dog was sustainable. I mean, some people making carbon black and all sorts of stuff were sustainable. Everyone is pushing a sustainable narrative, and not all narratives are equal, and not all narratives are achievable. I mean, if you look at chemical recycling of polypropylene using pyrolysis and steam cracking, you can't have more than 50% efficiency. 50% of your carbon is gone. But we're having people promoting this as an end game for the thing. It's green, it's great. Okay, it's slightly less bad than not doing it, but doesn't make it the primary objective. I think there needs to be some nuance that says, okay, actually, this is actually a significantly better option than this. This one is slightly better. This is really good. Let's try and promote those things that are really good, because people want to have an easy decision. So my wife goes to the supermarket and says, which should I buy? Which is more sustainable? I said, I don't know. And I work in the industry. I don't know which is the most sustainable. It depends. And people don't want to have it depends as their option to buy something. So we need a system that says, yes, this is preferable. We need excellent labeling. So I know a lot of work's going on in the US with the BPI and everything else. They have labeling. We need design for composting. We need labeling for composting so that people can say, yep, there's a big label on there with a big sticker on it. I know that goes into this. I don't need to, as you say, look at the bottom and with my bad eyesight and try and work out what is that a 2 or a 1 on that little bit on the bottom. Something that makes it absolutely easy to do. And then for the MRFs and everyone else, the people collecting, to be engaged and say, yeah, I'm going to get a good quality feed stream. So this is well labeled, so I know it's going to go and it's going to be collected. If you go to the composter, he knows that the stuff, he can see the label, it's going to be great. He doesn't have to do huge amounts of sorting. And the levels of contamination will be significantly reduced. So one of the big issues we get is from the composters is, if I start taking these materials, I'll get all sorts of contamination. And that is a potential issue, but with labeling and everything else and segregation, we can, and easy to understand rules for the consumer, we can get around that.
Yeah, I had a comment because I think we were talking about market acceptance, right? And at GoPHA, we see quite a dramatic shift in the last, let's say, 1.5 years. So where people were still in experimentation mode in the last 5 years, so to say, people are really coming out now with their communication and their marketing, because people also see the threat of being associated with persistent plastics, with microplastics generating materials, where actually we have alternatives here that are renewable, they are also recyclable, compostable, and also the option to not be persistent in nature. And if you have options like this, why would you still like to use persistent plastics, right?
We've talked a lot about Europe. Leah, I think you're based in the States. Is there anything that you would say is different in the North American context?
North America has seen a dramatic shift in looking towards renewable materials. In fact, I think most people have seen the news out of the White House recently where they announced that they want to replace 90% of plastics with biomaterials. And that's because they want to build on the U.S. is very strong agriculturally. And they want to be able to use that resource to be able to make improvements in climate targets. And that's important. It's not just a waste thing. It's everything in those bold goals that the administration rolled out is tying back to climate. So looking for materials with ultra low carbon footprints. And to do that, you need something that's fully bio-based. Having things that are compostable so you can enable food waste diversion. So you reduce your methane emissions, adding compost to soil, again, to strengthen that agricultural base and improve carbon sequestration. I mean, it's really quite focused. And additionally, they're really looking to build compost infrastructure and broadly, not just with the federal government, but make sure that composters are incentivized and helping them economically close the loop. Because a composter is not just in the business of accepting waste. They're in the business of selling compost. And if they aren't selling compost, then the whole system isn't going to work. So we've seen some really interesting examples where municipalities have actually passed city codes that say we will offer organics recycling to our residents. And in exchange, anytime you build a new building or disturb the soil, you have to include X amount of compost in your construction project, thereby working out the contracting with the composters to make sure that the economics make sense for them as much as the quality of the compost. So it's a very dynamic environment right now. It's really quite fun.
Yeah, we are starting some work with the Composting Manufacturing Alliance in the United States. So it's still in the works, but what we see there is that it's really regionally dependent how the infrastructure looks like on waste management in general, but also especially the organic fraction. It can really shift from city to city, municipality to municipality. And this is also what makes it so complicated. But what we can aid is indeed, like Derek also mentioned, with design for compostability, communication for compostability, and that's how you create a system that can actually work.
I think we also be, I'm very connected with the US as well. I think we also need to be very much on our guard to make sure certain states don't legislate in such a way that is not conducive to doing what we want. Last year or the year before, California wanted to legislate and say that unless, I think it was 80% of the population had access to composting facilities, that you couldn't call it compostable. The idea being that people would build more composting facilities. The outcome would have been that I can't call it compostable, so I can't put that label on. How can I sell it for more? This material is more expensive than my existing one. There's no incentive to do that. So compostability material packaging would have gone down to nothing. We have to be on our toes.
I think each state is starting to shift to understand that they aren't just, like we've been discussing, regulating plastic and packaging waste, but they're trying to meet climate targets. And I think that will help states that have been really laser focused on packaging say, really, what am I trying to accomplish? Am I trying to reduce waste, or do I have climate targets that I need to hit? So in the state of Minnesota where I live, I mean, they introduced organics recycling purely to hit climate targets. And then everything else came after that. And now the city of Minneapolis has, a best-in-class composting system in the U.S., better than California. And I'll say it here, but maybe not there. So, but it's really quite good. And it was really climate-driven. And I think that's just so essential. You can't talk about plastics, you can't talk about packaging without thinking about your holistic climate impacts from your feedstocks through to end of life.
Thank you. So we've talked about the regulatory landscape, the market landscape, and finally, when thinking about these more practical questions, these how questions, I'm interested in the availability of feedstocks and whether that is a bottleneck or how does that look? Interested in hearing from the PLA, PHA, Europe, North America. How does that look in terms of the capacity of the market to meet the potential demand and deliver those sustainability gains? Rick?
Yeah, I know the beauty of and I can speak only for PHA, but the beauty of PHA is that there's a plethora of bacteria that convert a very large variety of feedstocks into different types of PHA. That means that you can use waste streams, you can use plant-based oils, such as even used cooking oils, plant-based oils, canola oil, for example. But even there's work being done by using CO2, for example, or even biogas. So by having that diversity, the system, together with also the end-of-life organic waste management system, creating biogas, creating volatile fatty acids, you can actually create a bio-based circular economy. And depending on which feedstocks are available in which area, because of course this is also changing a lot, you can target that particular bacteria that you can ferment with a certain feedstock.
Thank you.
I would, there's something hidden behind your question. So your question is implying that there is a shortage of feedstocks, or that if we use food substances, we are going to take the mouth out of a starving child's, taking the food out of the mouth of a starving child. The reality is there's more than enough food in the world to feed everyone. It is not a lack of food, it's a food waste issue. I think in the US, something close to 50% of food is wasted in the whole process. If we could adjust our food production processes to produce less waste, it's not even a thought, is there enough feedstock to operate on? We can go into the European Bioplastics produces data and says so much of the arable land is 0.2 or 0.0, whatever it is percent, next to no numbers. Sometimes there's a bit of an issue with that, because if someone is thinking, if I use that, I'm taking the food out of the mouth of a starving child, so I'm only using this amount of land, so I'm only killing this amount of people. It's not really the same. There is more than enough, and for us to do what we want to do, it's really small. We use sugar, you use corn. Sugar, there's less than 50% of the world's sugar is made for food. It's going for a whole range of other things. You're associating something, assuming it's a food feedstock, when it's a reality. And I would advocate that probably feeding your child sugar is not the best thing to do.
Just to clarify, I wasn't meaning to imply that. I had more the question of capacity for industrial processing in mind, rather than original feedstock. But it is something that is raised very often by opponents of bioplastics. Yeah.
I did a little back of the envelope math before this and figured that if you converted all 380 million metric tons of annual plastics usage to bioplastics using European bioplastics land use data, you would only use 13% of the arable land in the entire world. And we know that bioplastics are not going to replace every type of plastic out there. I mean, the conversion of sugars to lactic acid and to other chemical monomers is incredibly efficient. And therefore, it makes it easy, and you don't need a lot of sugar to do this conversion when you're using sugarcane, as we're going to do in Thailand, use in Thailand, and industrial cornstarch in the U.S. There's so much. I mean, you mentioned food surplus in the U.S. The U.S. produces 146 billion more meals than needs to be consumed by the population and what they export for food. I mean, I think it's 38% of the food supply. So if there are hungry people, we should be better at exporting our food more than anything else. So there's definitely not a shortage of sugar-based feedstocks in this world.
Maybe I would take the opportunity and address this wording of first and second and third generation feedstock, because we think it's not necessarily the right approach. What we are trying to establish is that people speak about agro-based feedstock, meaning that you use plants that are rich in carbohydrates, but also lignocellulosic feedstock. I mean, lignocellulosic feedstock, cellulose, it's the material that has been longest used for bioplastics, right? Or waste as a feedstock material. So I think it makes more sense to think into these categories. I also think it makes sense to look at what do we have also on a regional level in place, right? So in Europe we have sugar beet, for example. We can use it here to produce biomaterials. So, yeah, as I said, I would like to think more into that categories and step away from that first and second and third, because you can use several materials and you need to look what is most sustainable and where the material is produced.
Thank you. So we're nearly reaching the end of the panel, and I'd like to maybe finish with giving each of you a chance to talk about what you would like to see change. How could we perhaps collaborate better to accelerate the realization of the opportunities that we see in compostables? I'll start at that end and work my way towards here. So,
Thank
Eric.
you. I need to think a bit about that. I think generally as a group we tend to coordinate pretty well. So we're all in various members of associations. I think probably we need to step up our game in terms of effectiveness. So I think we have some goals and we quite often sometimes get sidetracked. Something comes out of the blue that is, what the hell's that? It's and we spend a lot of time firefighting. I think we maybe need to think about how better to be less perhaps defensive, more on the front foot and say, okay, let's go and this is what we're going to do and be less defensive against the why is this person saying this and why is this person that, because then you get into a mindset of, okay, here's all the answer to those questions, and reality is we want people to understand a vision. And a vision is not best described by reasons why something else isn't good.
Leah.
So strategically, we think a lot about scale. Scaling our manufacturing, scaling conversion, scaling end-of-life infrastructure. And I think that it's going to take unusual partnerships to be able to get us to scale. So whether it's from a raw material supplier to a converter, and being able to create film packaging at rates similar to incumbent materials, or being able to partner with machinery manufacturers. We have a partnership with EMA, for example, on coffee capsules. They're not our direct customer, but what we're doing is figuring out how to optimize both machinery and material to be able to produce that product at scale. And so really being able, bio-based materials, we are stepping into a world that was not created for us. The machinery, the processing, the supply chains, they are designed around something totally different. And so we need to look for, of course, what is the low-hanging fruit? What are the biggest, quickest things we can do to bring these materials to market that have a maximum impact on climate? And then how do we do the hard long-term work to scale to get that next generation of products at scale and onto the market? So scale is my theme. So
maybe to emphasize a bit what Leah just said, I also think what you need is to get the whole value chain cooperating. This was how it worked finally in Italy, because you had the bioplastic producers, you had the retailers, you had the composters, and you had policy. They all worked together to make that work, right? And and if you have this whole value chain together, then find agreements on how to communicate properly, on how to label properly, on also agree on what applications make sense. So if we find a big alignment there, I think it could work out.
Yeah, I agree with the other speakers here, so I don't want to repeat that. But I think we have an opportunity together to really create solutions, applications and products that serve a system, right? That are not just an application that you prefer not to see ever again after you produce it, right? But actually create the option for recycling the carbon. In what way? Via composting, via recycling, via digestion, doesn't matter. But really provide a system solution that can provide value to many partners in that value chain. And actually, what people need to do, especially on the brand side, is really to speak out today. Because we work with brands that are doing highly innovative things with producers, but it's still very much under the radar. And what we see is so much pushback from composters, for example, on the day-to-day issues. something is not at the right cycle time, etc., etc. But if these big brands, together with us, associations like ourselves, can speak out, you can really pull the entire industry forward, and that's really what's required to make that system change.
Thank you. Well, it's time to see if any of our audience members would like to give us a question. Don't be shy. I'm looking for hands. Okay, we have one here.
Thank you. Thanks for all your different speeches. Just wondering, it was briefly referred to the benefits of compost and the structure for the soils, especially the European soils. And one of the risks is many of these, and Derek mentioned, 3-4 applications. This, besides the fact that it's quite a discriminatory approach, to just have 4 applications for an innovative material. Many people don't understand the end of life of organic recycling, which is also a recycling technology, even though at European level there's a differentiation between what is recyclable or recyclability and then compostability as something completely different or unknown. So it would be good also to stress more and to say how this specific type of organic recycling contributes to the circular economy. And I think that's what is missing for many people, because as this is not a secondary raw material that will enter again in the loop directly like for the other materials that are recycled, it seems that there are no benefits. So I think we'll need to look to the facts and figures and really to address this concretely and probably in a more simple way so our stakeholders can understand. Thank you. It was more a comment than a question.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Would anyone like to respond to those very interesting remarks?
I would say something that I think it's important when we deal with to talk to the composters, and we want them to feel it's something I want to do, not something if I have to. So I think they see the benefit of compostable packaging as having a benefit and not being something that is detrimental to the things, and I'll do it if I'm told to do it. But I'd rather just take garden sweepings or whatever it is, or food waste from front of house, whatever, and to say, okay, yeah, this actually does contribute to the quality of the compost that I'm producing.
So, we know there's a big variance in acceptance of compostable products between, let's say, Italy and Germany and then the other countries in between. That, I think, is the biggest barrier to acceptance of compostable plastics in Europe. And as an industry, I think, what is the strategy to kind of drive that, greater acceptance, working with the legislators and working with the governments in the different countries?
Yeah, I can comment on that. It's a big question. Yeah, I think there's many angles to answer your question, but I think there's a tip of recognition. So whatever you said was really right. Composting is definitely seen not at the equal level as, for example, mechanical or chemical recycling in circulating carbon. This is something we need to change and provide data to prove that actually there is a lot of value there and we can actually create that circulation of carbon in an effective way. At the same time, we see the tip of the iceberg where actually the compostable industry and infrastructure is being recognized as something valuable by, for example, this waste framework directive that's coming in 1st of January. So I think we need to work together as the industry, making sure that we show the technical opportunity there and the capability, and also work together on the business case that can be developed there.
I think we need to work with the brands. I think the brands will see the biggest benefit. I think we have a problem, say in France. So France will only accept home compostable. We have something different in Italy. Brands don't want to have 20 different packaging depending on where it's going. They want to have something that's simple. And they say, okay, I don't want to develop a solution specific for this area. I want to have a specific solution for Europe. And to have so many unharmonized regulations makes it very difficult about what is and what isn't acceptable. So I think we need, as not an organization, but a group of companies to work with the brand owners, because I'm sure they want to have as simplified a system as possible to say, okay, yeah, this is what will be acceptable, and push, I don't know, the different countries to harmonize their regulation.
And consumers want brand owners to do that. I mean, consumers want brands to take steps on their behalf so that, again, that decision is easy for them. And brands, I think they are starting to really realize that responsibility. I mean, post-2017, you started to see a real rise in consumer activism in the plastics space, and lots of protests and lots of press visibility. And so now I think brands are feeling that pressure and are maybe a little scared to make the wrong decision. And I think that's something we have to help them get over with the right data, maybe the right life cycle analysis, if we can draw our boundary conditions appropriately, so that they feel confident making that decision on behalf of consumers who want somebody to take responsibility and make that easy for them.
I see. Oh, there's another question here.
There's been a lot of talk of oxo-degradables as a solution and a potential threat to waste. I'd just like to get your opinions on this.
Oxo-degradables are not allowed in Europe, first of all. They're still being produced in other parts of the world. I think what we see with many legislations is that people look closely at European legislation. So in my perspective, they should be banned everywhere. But this is something up to the local regulators.
I mean, there's a problem in the UK with the BS spec that gives some credibility to oxo-degradable type materials. I think having an idea that somehow you can get your polypropylene face mask and you can chuck it away, and after nth number of years it'll go away is a sustainable idea of operation, for me, is quite bizarre. So
maybe we can just make clear. I mean, we were talking about biodegradable and compostable plastics, and let's just make it fix. Oxo-degradable plastics are not biodegradable plastics and not compostable plastics. That's a totally different concept, which does not fit with the well-established standards, and so it's just something different, and that's also why they are banned in Europe. Yeah.
Companies in Europe are still selling them in other parts of the world. What do you make of that?
not best pleased, I think.
Well, commonly they're marketed to be able to create landfill space, right? They're like, oh, this will help something degrade in a landfill. In a well-managed landfill, absolutely nothing breaks down. Not a newspaper, not a banana, nothing. Because things breaking down in a landfill generate methane emissions. And so mismanaged landfills, then things are breaking down, but that's not the point. We are not at a shortage, unfortunately, I guess, of landfill space. The U.S. is very big. We have many canyons we can fill before we would need some sort of additive to be able to create additional landfill space. So we don't want anything breaking down in a landfill for absolutely any reason.
Often they are marketed as oxo biodegradables. Is there any difference?
I think it's inappropriate for me to say what I think about that technology, because it would be rather forceful, shall we say. I think there's a lot of disputed use of words to try and make it acceptable. So I think if you really want to know, I suggest you talk to Professor Romani at the University of Michigan. He was a worldwide expert on that, and he has some quite strong opinions on the suggestions that is an appropriate technology.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions and engagement today. I've received the signal from the audience that this is that our time has elapsed, so unfortunately we have time for no more questions. But I'd just like to thank very much once again Rick, Leah, Constance, Derek. Yeah, I've still got 5 days of Interfact to go. Derek, Leah, Constance, and Rick.
Thank you.
Rick. Thank you very much. And please do stay, network. It's a chance to informally mingle with our experts and those from Taghleef as well. Thank you, everyone.